Welcome to the Water Play Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Hebert. Lucas is not in for today's show. We hope he gets better soon. To begin, we didn't do an episode last week prior to the Pro Bowl, but the AFC NFC Championship game weekend, the Chiefs beat the Ravens 17-10, and the Lions lost to the 49ers 34-31. To explain this the best way I can, hang on a second. To explain this, the Chiefs offense changed during the year. Okay? It changed during the year. The offense is all now, let's ground and pound with Pacheco and Edwards-Helaire and throw the ball to Kelsey as much as we can. Once that doesn't happen, it's when the offense struggles. In Baltimore, they gave up 17 points in the first half, and you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening to Baltimore? But then their defense only gave up 5 first downs, no points, and I think it was like 2.1 yards per attempt. It was not a lot. So they did the end of the bargain. The problem is, again, the Ravens offense. This has been an issue for a number of years. We criticize other teams for the same thing. The Ravens, when they go against an opponent that is either on their level, a little bit better than them, or even just a little worse than they are, they get dominated. They just can't play a style. This was a team that was in the Ravens that was more physical on defense and on offense. And Lamar was playing out of his mind. That didn't happen in this game. He got frustrated, Lamar did. They didn't try to throw the ball to OBJ really that much in the first half. Yes, I know you say, well, Zay Flowers had that fumble through the end zone and all that stuff. Yes, that is true. He's trying to make a play. And it's a hard lesson to learn. But you can't throw a ball in a triple coverage because the tight end says he's open. He's not. It's not a good throw. At times, Lamar looked tentative. He looked like he should I run, should I not run? And by the time he made that choice, the guy was right around him and was making the tackle. There's not much you can do. So the Chiefs end up winning the game, played a great defensive game. And this happens a lot. And it's not talked about. Sometimes when you have a defense like the Chiefs are, last year they had to play all these young guys. All the guys got hurt. All these young guys are playing. L'Jarius Sneed is now playing slot and outside because of necessity. So they played all these young guys. And now they're the best defense or one of the best defenses in the league because they're doing that consistently. Because now it's, oh, these guys, yes, they won a championship, but they now have all this experience that they're going to be much better. And they are. They're way better. That's sometimes it's one of those bad scenarios that end up being a great scenario for the future. And that's a bad situation turning into a good situation later in the future. It just happens. It needed to happen. And it helped the Chiefs throughout the season, especially in this game. Next up, Lions vs. 49ers. As we said, the Lions lost to the 49ers 34-31. The game wasn't even that close. Now you say, if you would have turned the game on in the first 3 quarters, or the start of the third quarter, you said, oh, the Lions are going to win. They were unstoppable. They could throw the ball wherever they wanted. They could run the ball over the Niners. Their defense was unstoppable. Brock Purdy never looked quite comfortable. And then just stopped. It stopped everywhere. The defense was not able to get off the field. The running game became non-existent. The passing game, they stopped trying to throw to St. Brown. Josh Reynolds had 2 big drops. There was a lot going on. And then there's obviously bad coaching, such as deciding 2 times on 4th down to go for it and not have a ideal play call on, where there's a quick answer to everything. And that's the reason I think they lost. It wasn't the fact they went for 4th down. I understand when you go to 4th down, when you're up 14, you say, okay, there's not much difference if we go for it or not. But when you're only up 7 or 10, that's like, let's kick the field goal. Now, Dan Campbell's an aggressive coach. I get that. At some point, you have to be an understanding coach and understand where we are, what's the score, what do we do. And I think that's just kind of in the lines all year. They want to be aggressive. Let's be aggressive. I get it. Not ideal in that situation. And then you're down 10 after previously, I think, being up 24 at one point. You're down 10. Right, you're down up 17, excuse me, up 17. And then you're down 10 within a quarter. And props to the Niners offense. They adjusted, the defense adjusted. And that was it. It just felt that the Lions thought that they were just going to be able to continue and unable to. And that's unfortunate. Because in the first half, the Lions did slash the 49ers every way they could. And then the next thing you know, unable to do it. That's really the big scenario that I come back from is what could have been if they would just have tried for the field goal at one of them. Now, moving into the news, an interesting hire for the Carolina Panthers, as the Panthers have hired former Bucs offensive coordinator Dave Canales. Dave Canales was the first-year offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that brought them to the NFC divisional round. He was entrusted with working with Baker Mayfield. And that passing offense was pretty good. I believe, if I remember correctly, the Buccaneers won 5 of their last 6, and that's how they got it to the playoffs. But Canales, first year offensive coordinator, I figured it had to be a young coach that was going to be able to deal with David Tepper. And that's what is going on. David Tepper took a young guy in division, and there's not a whole lot to know about Dave Canales because not many people have heard of him. Because first year guy, it's kind of hard to talk about. But the one thing that concerns me a little bit was the inability of the Buccaneers to run the football. Besides that game against Philadelphia, which Philadelphia's had a bad run defense all year, they weren't able to run the football. So that's concerning. But the Panthers are rolling with Dave Canales as their new head coach. The Titans hire former Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Now, you just think Callahan. I heard that name. Yes. Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach of the Cleveland Browns, that's his son, in which the Browns have given Bill Callahan permission that if he wants to join his son's coaching staff, he can. So we could have both Callahans on the same on the same coaching staff. Brian Callahan, Coach Joe Burrow. I thought he did a great job with Jake Browning. You're in an impossible situation, and you made it a little less impossible. It's hard to do. I like what Brian Callahan does. It's a very good use of his star players. And the Titans, there's a limit to that. I mean, we'll see what happens with Derrick Henry over the course of the next month or two. But it looks like he's gone. So you got Treylon Burks. You got to work with Levis or whoever the quarterback is. Most likely it is Will Levis. So that's going to be interesting. They need to acquire talent. But I like the hire. I thought it was a good hire. I thought that's a good hire. And a lot of coaches say a very similar thing, but because it was national media, it was Jerry Jones saying it. He said, "Look, if you have a great team around you, a great coaching staff around you, other teams are gonna want your people." Makes sense. It's 100% logical. He's right. The Bengals had one of the best coordinators in Brian Callahan. It wasn't a shocker that the Titans decided that was the direction we wanted to go. Not a shocker. Next up, the Falcons hire former Rams defensive coordinator and former Falcons defensive coordinator Raheem Morris. Now, this came as a shocker. Belichick got, I believe, his second interview with the Falcons before anybody else, if I remember correctly. And yet, he was not picked. And the only solution I can come up with is Bill is 72 years old. And we saw this with Pete Carroll. We saw this with Bill. The older coaches aren't getting hired as often right now. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a few minutes when we talk about what the Eagles had did. But I think it's the style of coaching, not exactly the guy you bring in. It's is the guy, does the players like him? And everyone that says, and they talk about like Bill Belichick, they all say, yeah, we like him. He's a tough coach, but we like him. He's a good coach and a great coach, and he's actually really funny. He just doesn't share that side of his personality to the media. But Raheem Morris got the job, and from my understanding, it comes from Belichick wanted to reconstruct how it was done. So Morris, this is the plan. The GM of the Falcons and Raheem Morris, now the head coach of the Falcons, will report to Arthur Blank, Arthur Blank directly and not Rich McKay as they had done in years prior. Maybe it was because Belichick wanted more control and didn't get it. Maybe it was because they thought Belichick would only be there for 2 years. They want someone for the long term. I don't know. Morris, I believe, is 48. So I think it might be playing the long game. Another team that's playing the long game is the Seattle Seahawks, as they have hired former Ravens defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald as head coach. This happened, I think, very quickly. And I think it's because both the Seahawks and the Commanders, who we'll talk about in a little bit, both had their eyes set on Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson decided, I'm going back to Detroit. And great job of the Seahawks. They said, okay, the best candidate is still out there, and that's Mike Macdonald. Whether or not that's true, it's just saying, okay, that's the best candidate. That's who we gotta get. They brought him in. They didn't let him leave, proverbially. Uh-uh. And hired him as the head coach. What's interesting is Mike Macdonald's 36. They literally cut like Pete Carroll's age in half. Pete Carroll's 72 years old. Macdonald's 36. They go from the oldest coach in the league to the youngest coach in the league. Um, quick note about Mike Macdonald was a defensive assistant with the Ravens, left to go to Michigan, became the defensive coordinator when Jim Harbaugh was there, became the defensive coordinator, went back 2 years ago to the Ravens coach under John Harbaugh as the Ravens defensive coordinator, now running his own ship in Seattle. And there's a lot of talent there. I would not be shocked if a lot of defensive players decide to go there. He regenerated Jadeveon Clowney's career. That was a revelation. Like what he was able to do with that. Patrick Queen, I wouldn't be surprised if he wants to go there. He's a free agent. Wouldn't be surprised. Bobby Wagner's a free agent in Seattle at the moment. Maybe he decides he wants to go back. There's a lot of people. So it's a wait and see project. But Mike Macdonald, the head coach in Seattle. Next up, the Bills named Joe Brady, who was the interim offensive coordinator, as full-time offensive coordinator. That was not a shock by any means. I believe Ken Dorsey went to I think it was Tennessee, might have been Cincinnati. I don't know 100%. I'll have to research that. But obviously, the offense worked way better with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. Now he's the full-time offensive coordinator. Next up, the Eagles have hired Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator and Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator. So let's start with Vic. Vic Fangio was coaching the Dolphins. And then one day, just out of the blue, it was announced that Fangio and the Dolphins were parting ways, mutually parting ways. Now, what does that exactly mean? It means I'm not firing you, but I don't want you here. Well, okay, you don't want me here, I don't want to be here, and then there you go. A day later, he's hired by the Eagles, which I found was interesting based on how the rules selection works, but that's neither here nor there. Then the Eagles hired Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. And the first thing that came out was the Eagles hired two people that the Cowboys can't beat, which makes no sense because the Cowboys beat the Chargers with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, so it makes no sense. I also want to make note the Eagles hired Doug Nussmeier as the quarterback coach, who also coached in Dallas. Just a sec. But back to Fangio, it really stems from Belichick, Cal, Vrabel, you can include, but Fangio, that old style of coaching in terms of I'm not going to be your friend. I don't need to be at your wedding day. I don't need to be your best man at your wedding day. I am going to teach you. And this gets you into some very interesting conversations. There's a lot of, for an example, schools that they are more content with you being a nice person than a great teacher. That they're more content with you being a student that likes your teacher than getting the best teacher for the job. And to me, there's no better teacher for a defensive coach than Vic Fangio. There isn't. His style, they were talking about it on Hard Knocks. I think it was Van Ginkel, if I remember correctly. He's talking about how, it's hard to learn Vic Fangio's system, but once you learn it, you realize how easy he makes everything. Like, it's not a complex, there's a complexity to it, but you realize just how many great positions he's putting you in to make plays. And that's what he's doing. And the same could go for Belichick, the same could go for Vrabel. But due to the fact they're not smiling and gonna go help you get your car washed and you're gonna go want to drink a beer with this man, do whatever you want to do with him. That's not how Fangio. That's not how any of these older coaches really work. They would tell, hey, this is how we teach. This is what we teach, and it goes back to the teaching. And there was a portion of it where, if I remember, it on Instagram. I think it was Javon Holland, but it was just put underneath in his Instagram, Javon Holland, and it said it shows Javon Holland like supposedly throwing rocks in the air and kicking rocks, like how could you guys do this to us? How could you get rid of a coach? Like, yeah, he's not fun. He's not like great. But we all had those teachers in school where we had the fun teacher that we liked. We might not have learned anything from them, but we liked them. But then we had that teacher who was hard nosed, tough, who's going to teach you. You may not like that person, but you learn the most from that person. That's the one you remember. I have two quick stories for this. I had a teacher who was a basketball coach. What I always learned, and I didn't understand it until I started going to the games, I realized what makes him a great teacher is he's a basketball coach. Is he's a coach. He realizes he's got to star people, but he's got this whole crew. They're not all stars, but he's got this whole crew of people he's got to bring for the next. He's got to bring along for the next 3 months, 2 months, whatever. And he's got to instill confidence in them, whether that's yelling at that guy or just patting him on the back. That's what makes a good coach. And what made him a good teacher was that he was a good coach. But what made him a good coach was he was a good teacher. He realized as a teacher, I have to have patience with these guys. So it instills either way. And so I had a teacher. He was a great teacher. But he understood, okay, I can push you. I gotta lean back a little bit. I could just pat you on the back. That's okay. But I'm gonna scream at you, or I'm gonna be like this. I'm gonna be right in your face. Because there's a reason for that. It was not because he was trying to be mean. It was because he was trying to teach you, and he knew how you were going to react. If it meant you're gonna work harder, then he was gonna do it. If it meant no, it doesn't work with me, okay, fine, we'll figure this out. That's what he would do, and it was smart. It was very smart on his part. It's very psychological, but very smart. I had another teacher who I liked. I liked him. He was a good teacher. I I didn't learn as much in that class. I had another teacher in that grade that I learned more from because he was deadline driven. This is the deadline. The deadline doesn't change. Get it done. I learned more in that class, and I remember more in that class than I did in the class of the teacher I liked. It's just the way it goes. It's the same thing here. Whoever you bring in as a coordinator, it's not about is he liked, can he do the best job? And Fangio does a great job. Does Fangio do the Eagles scare me? Absolutely, because he's a great coordinator and the talent that they got. So, but Kellen Moore does not. It's not the same. I know it. Cowboys fans know it. Chargers fans know it. That how of a coordinator he is. He's a talented coordinator, but we're more terrified of Vic Fangio because we know how Vic is one of the great coordinators in our sport today. Next up, the Commanders have hired their head coach. It is Dan Quinn. Now, like similar to the Seahawks, Ben Johnson was probably the first person on their list. Ben Johnson says no, staying in Detroit. And the Commanders panicked. They panicked. They said, okay, what do we do? What do we do now? And they went with Dan Quinn. Now, what shocked me a lot in this coaching cycle was a couple things. Vrabel, Belichick, even Pete Carroll, not hired as head coaches. That was shocking. But what also shocked me, and Ben Johnson decided to go back to Detroit. That shocked me too. But what shocked me the most was the amount of defensive coordinators hired this year. Like as we go, there's 2 offensive coordinators and then 3 defensive coordinators as head coaches. That's a shock. That's a shock, and you couldn't believe that. Now, I was shocked a little bit for a couple reasons. One, I thought, okay, if you're Commanders, don't need to make a decision now. Wait till after the Super Bowl. Be smart. Hire the team that wins and hire their guy. That's what you do. Or hire the team that has a better offense. That's what you do. They ran into this. They said, okay, well, we got to make a decision now. And they went with Dan Quinn. I was a little surprised that no one went with Aaron Glenn. I thought he was a great defensive coordinator. But they went with Dan Quinn. And Dan Quinn, it was official on Saturday. Sunday, it was announced that he would be bringing Joe Witt with him as the defense coordinator for the Commanders. Now, we all know who runs that defense. It's Dan Quinn. We all know that. That's not a shocker. But Joe Witt being brought in as a defensive coordinator. This leads into my next topic as the Cowboys now have a defense coordinator vacancy. They're set to interview Ron Rivera today, Mike Zimmer today, I believe, and there's some inside candidates. Now, I should say inside candidate, not candidates. Joe Witt was an inside candidate that was supposed to be interviewed this morning. Announces, nope, I'm going to Washington to be their DC. Now, Witt's never been a defensive coordinator. He's been a pass game coordinator and a cornerback coach. Never a DC before. So this is new territory for him. But I really think it was because Dallas didn't say, okay, yeah, Mike, you have 1 more year left. Let's renegotiate that contract. They didn't do that. So I think there's that issue. But now you're in this position. Ron Rivera was the name that was floated out there even when Dan Quinn still had the job in Dallas. Mike Zimmer, that name came out of the woodwork pretty much the day up, the day that Dan Quinn left, that it was announced that he would be the head coach. Mike Zimmer said, I would be interested in that coaching job. And then the inside recruits, which is now, I keep pronouncing this wrong. Aden. It's Aden Dirty. I keep saying Aiden. It's Aden. So let's go back. Ron Rivera initially was interviewed for the defensive coordinator position way back in the day when he was the Bears defensive coordinator. Actually, he was interviewed way back in the day, didn't get the job. Mike Zimmer, former defensive coordinator of the Cowboys, was a defensive coach for the Cowboys before that, before being named the defensive coordinator, bounced around, became the head coach in Minnesota, last coach in the NFL in 2021. And then the inside candidates were Joe Witt and Aden Durde. Aden Durde is the defensive line coach who he's had a very interesting coaching career, not just in the NFL, but in his whole coaching life. He's, first off, I should say this, he's German. He's from Germany. Um, he was at one point earlier, he was an intern for the Cowboys in 2014, 2015. I don't know if it was before that or after that. He was the head of the International Pathway, NFL Pathway Program Players. It's a very wordy title, I know. He was the head of that as like in the defensive coordinator for a team. So he has some experience in that department, though it's on that level, not in the NFL, not on the NFL level. And then, was an outside linebackers coach, became a defensive line coach, has been the Cowboys defensive line coach since 2021, I think. Yeah, 2021. And now, I thought he would be the guy to leave with Dan Quinn. He has a lot of ties with Dan Quinn. Wasn't, or hasn't left at this moment. Um, there was also something that came out that Don Wink Martindale could be the defensive coordinator, which I'm looking at this as I'm reading it off right now. I'm like, who would I rather want? And I think what it would be, because the same issue goes for Aden Durde as it did for Joe Witt, first time defensive coordinator. You don't have a staff. You don't have guys that you would trust. Wink Martindale would be interesting because he knows how to work with athletic players like Michael Parsons. He did it with Isaiah Simmons in New York. Mike Zimmer deals with had talented players like Everson Griffin, Danielle Hunter. The issue with Wink Martindale is he likes to blitz, and this defense isn't built for really blitzing. It's just not. They blitz the front four, but they're not built to do that consistently. So, and Aden did it again. Aden Durde, he coaches Micah, so that would be a shocker if he's hired, because now you're bringing in a lot of guys who don't know how to work with him. I will make note, Al Harris was not interviewed at the moment. Maybe he is. He hasn't been interviewed for defense coordinator positions. Just to be frank with that. All right, to finish up, the Super Bowl preview: 49ers versus the Chiefs. Chiefs are getting +2. This game is going to be very interesting. I want to see how Brock Purdy looks in this game. I really do. I want to see what they do against Deebo Samuel. I want to see what the Chiefs do against Deebo Samuel. I'm going to take the Chiefs to win. For one reason only. The run defense of the Niners is not great. I mean, I understand the Chiefs' passing offense isn't good, but the run, they're way better at running the football, and the Niners aren't good at handling it. So the Chiefs win, in my mind. They'll win probably a similar score to the game against Baltimore, 17-10. And that is the end of the Wordplay Podcast, powered by StreamYard. We thank StreamYard for allowing us to record the record the What a Play podcast. And we will see you guys next time after the Super Bowl. Peace.